32 ticks following. So they are swallowing. Monkey is swallowing. Snake self swallowing. Next, a swallow 2 will fly and come and swallow. You're ever swallow in a hollow gallow, making a whole lot of halabaloo. Jale Kalu, we know say you chop the money some, so give me the loot. Do you really want a revolution or just your turn?
Hello, Andre. So great to have you on here to talk about your book, a fantastic read. The Chiffon Trenches. It's a New York Times bestseller. It has become, hasn't it?
Yes.
And it's quite an honor to talk to you about that and to see you again. It's been a minute since we saw.
Yeah, great last year. Great to see you.
Yeah. How's everything going with you?
Very well, thank you.
Great. All right. I know it's early, so we'll get right into it. So this book, it's been about 17 years since your last memoir, ALT. And now we have the Chiffon Trenches. So what motivated you to write another memoir? And what really changed between the 17 years between ALT and the Chiffon Trenches?
Well, what motivated me to write the book was that I indeed had lived a full life in my career at Vogue. Life had changed for me. I had expanded my talents into lucrative freelance things. I had a documentary called The Documentary According to Andre, The Gospel According to Andre, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I came to Nigeria, Lagos. I showed that in Lagos last year in 2019. Did I?
Yeah.
Was it 2019?
Yes. No, it was 2018, actually, 2018.
And what's prompted me to write the memoir is that I had decided that after having seen a beautiful documentary that had been directed by Kate Novak, that people loved me and I needed to say more things about my life that I had not said in my first memoir. My first memoir was more or less a memoir about the people who influenced me the most, the South, my grandmother, growing up in the South, and my great mentor, Deanna Vreeland. And I thought that this memoir should expand into the vicissitudes of my life, based on my life at Vogue, based on my life in Korea, in the world of style, as a curatorial expert of style and fashion history. And also life had changed for me at Vogue. And that's why I decided to write it, because I thought it should be a very honest book. So I'd gone into issues that I had not gone into in my first memoir, that went into my second memoir, such as my childhood abuse, and my abuse and systemic racism that I had not fully addressed in my first memoir. Racism in the workplace, racism in fashion, racism in Vogue, racism everywhere in the world. And the book had a timely debut because it came out just in May. And then afterwards, the great moments of Black Lives Matter as it reached its crescendo with the death and the martyrdom of George Floyd, with that policeman putting his knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. So I felt that this book was really a very important book. It has been very successful. People buy it on the Audible. I read the book. I have it on audio tape. They have it on Kindle. So it's been very successful, and I'm very proud of it. And that's why I wrote it, because I had things to say that I had not said 17 years ago.
And they were actually worth reading. I actually have a copy from you, a signed copy, and I've also listened to the Audible, which you narrate, like you said. Yes. But then one of the things you just mentioned is how the book came out at a very timely period around the huge Black Lives Matter movement, spurred on by the death of George Floyd. And incidentally, one of the things that people feel like you hadn't done enough of with your huge platform at Vogue and in all the other publications in fashion in general was that you weren't enough of an activist. How do you feel when you get this feedback from people?
I want to say to you, Mr. Joseph E.K., that people always say that, and that is absolutely incorrect. Every day I worked in Vogue, I always try to include in my work, in my printed page, in my columns, Life with Andre, and then the column was changed to, it was called Style Facts at first, when faxes were very popular. Then we went over to email and it became Life with Andre. Of course, the title was changed without my approval. The title was changed by a consensus between the editor-in-chief and the managing editor, and no one ever asked me, what did I want as a title? That's what racism is, They change the title of my column and they don't even consult me. They make the decision without me in a room where I'm not even invited to. And that, in my activism, I always try to have in my monthly column something of Blackness, something of diversity. I always embrace Blackness. I always try to, and I didn't go in and scream. I have to have, oh, I need something Black in my column. It just came naturally to me. But of course, you know, I recently had came across a recall. I had a recall recently about 2 weeks ago, but I realized one day I had put in my ideas for my column that was going to be printed in February, which is Black History Month in America. And I put in a lot of things, I think, because it was Black History Month, I wanted to celebrate Blackness in my column in Vogue.
Yeah.
Well, my editor-in-chief, Anna Winter, said, Andre, we are not doing Black History Month in Vogue. I mean, this was verbalized to me. And that was one of the quietest moments of an offensive moments in my life. And I just went out of the room. I buried all of these slaps, all of these offensive and insensitive and tone-deaf comments. As the Black Lives Matter became very important, Ms. Winter also said in a public statement that due to the intolerant and hurtful behavior of herself, that things were going to change at Condé Nast, particularly at Vogue and all the Condé Nast magazines, and they are changing for the positive. They are totally devoted and focused on changing. There are more covers about Blackness than there've ever been. They're using Black photographers to take their covers. Vanity Fair had a cover of the Black actress Viola Davis, and it was photographed by a young, brilliant photographer named Dario Calais. You know, before Black Lives Matter, they did Beyonce 2 years ago, who was photographed on the September cover, the biggest cover in the year of Vogue, biggest advertising issue, and they used Arthur Mitchell, a young African-American photographer, Black, and that was the first time a Black man had ever photographed a subject for the cover of Vogue.
That's amazing. Now, early in the book, you open up by talking about one of your biggest gifts, which is your mind, your extensive knowledge. One of the things you said very early on in the book was that you would, if you had to give an advice to a young person, you would say, learn as much as you can. I think this is the understatement of the book, because one doesn't really appreciate how much knowledge you have. I mean, at 70 years old, at 71 years old, you're able to describe to the minutest detail such extensive work spanning decades and decades and decades. How have you managed to keep your mind so sharp? And how were you able to pull all of this details together in writing this book? You paint such vivid pictures that just reading the book transports a person through these fantastic mental visual landscapes. And at the end of it, you wonder, wait, how does he do that at 71? How did you do this?
It's all under here in the head. Thank God for the brain. Yeah. I don't have diaries. I wrote the book entirely from memory. I don't have diaries or journals. I sometimes look for facts. I turn back and look for factual dates. Everything in this book has been written from my head to the computer screen, to the computer keyboard. I don't have journals or years. I don't keep journals every day. And my memory, my recall, my ancestral recall, and my recall of memory is something that I feel I've been blessed by God. I totally think that God gave me a brain. He gave me a way to see the world, and I owe it to God. I owe it to the good Lord that I was able to write this book with the descriptions and the richesse. The richesse is also influenced by my richesse of literature and knowledge. Reading how words must sound on the page. Words must be evocative of a musicality, because our culture, our Black culture, is a culture of musicality. As the great Dr. Cornel West says, we are a blues culture. We are blues people. We invented the blues. And we invented a culture of spirituality in the anthems and the spiritual songs of the people on the plantation picking cotton. They got nothing in the end. They got a log cabin and a dirt floor in the log cabin, and they got some stew meat in the pot for 5 people or 10 people, and they got some cornbread, and that's what dinner is. But they survived. And they survived through their spirituality, their musicality, their spiritual and Negro anthems, as they are called. And they should be called Negro anthems. You know, people who just have a sense of celebrating life through song, through music, and through the word. I'm very much impressed and inspired by Toni Morrison, Nobel Prize author, James Baldwin. I read James Baldwin almost every day or every week this summer on my porch because I'm in the pandemic and we're sheltered down. I don't go out much. I'm happy to be a recluse. I can entertain myself. So all through my life, I've leaned on books as good friends. I've leaned on writing. I've leaned on words. I don't want to sound pretentious. Marcel Proust, Gustave Flaubert, some of the great French authors, André Gide. At the same time, I've been very, very impressed with one of my great American writers who was a friend, Truman Capote in Cold Blood. So that's how I got to write this, because I think of writing as something, it must be almost lyrical and musical, prose musical in words.
You are an accomplished academic. You are a scholar. You have a master's degrees with honors in French language from an Ivy League university, no less. Why do you think that this aspect of your life, being an academic, having so much extensive academic knowledge, is often not as public as, you know, the glamorized aspect of your fashion life, so to speak?
That is the way the world is, unfortunately, in the United States of America. People do not particularly embrace your achievements, your education achievements, not so perhaps put on the forefront, on the front of the stove, on the front burner. But if you got that backup, if you got that foundation, which I have, thank God, then you're going to go further. And I couldn't have gone as far as I did in life had I not had the education that I had in North Carolina Central University, in a state university, and then I received a scholarship to Brown to get my master's degree. I was working on my PhD when I left that to go to New York and meet Deanna Vreeland, and then she started my career.
Yeah. Speaking of Deanna Vreeland, oftentimes, again, this book has been mischaracterized as being about your relationship with, of course, the current editor-in-chief of Vogue, Ms. Anna Wintour. But there's a lot more to the book, and it talks about your relationship with quite a number of people you worked with. I mean, there is your working time with Andy Warhol, at the Interview magazine, Women's Wear Daily, and even Ebony Magazine. So tell us a bit more about your work experience, particularly because we're here at the African, it's an African festival. Tell us about your time at Ebony Magazine, because we don't hear enough about this.
That's very good. That's a very good question. Well, Ebony Magazine was a very important part of my life. I only worked there for a year. Yeah. I only worked there for one full year. I had a great relationship with the late Miss Eunice Johnson, who was a pioneer in fashion. She invented the Ebony Fashion Fair, where in the 1950s, she went to Paris and bought the couture. She bought the couture, full price.
Wow. She'd
go in and buy clothes. They have a collection of Ebony Fashion Fair, iconic pieces that go on a tour. They went on a tour about 2 years ago all over the Americas of their beautiful clothes, from the couture from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, right up to the 2000s. They have Saint Laurent clothes, and some jackets cost $60,000. Wow. Mrs. Johnson would not hesitate to put down a check for $60,000 at Mr. Saint Laurent's couture collection to bring back that jacket and an ensemble, put it in her Ebony Fashion Fair show. The show traveled around the country with models. Pat Cleveland was one of the young models. She's a great model. Pat Cleveland, who just inspired Tom Ford's show, Spring Summer 2021. He was inspired by Pat Cleveland from the 70s. But this Mrs. Johnson was the first Black woman to go to Paris, sit on the front row as an important person. And the Ebony Fashion Fair was not only important for allowing people to see what real fashion was like, that they perhaps could never see, like high fashion. Yeah. It raised charity. It was a charitable organization that raised money for charities, local charities, as it went from city to city. In the season, it would have a tour of maybe 6 months. It would go from almost every state in America, including Hawaii.
Wow.
And sometimes Puerto Rico. And so Mrs. Johnson thought that I could come to Ebony, and I did go. And when I got the call, I was happy to go to Ebony. I was in between my jobs at Women's Wear Daily and Vogue, 1980. And I went there with no reservations whatsoever. Mrs. Johnson was extraordinary. She was as elegant as anyone was. And one of my greatest moments was when I got to introduce Mrs. Johnson to Deanna Vreeland in the flesh. Now, let me tell you the story that goes back to that important story.
Yeah.
I don't think I made it mentioned in the book, but Mrs. Vreeland I had worked on a show called Romantic and Glamorous Hollywood Design in 1974. And then I went on to work an interview, and then subsequently, she did a show called American Women of Style. And that was a show that I was not working in full time, but I would go to the museum and see her. And she walked through the show and she said, I have to have an installation of Josephine Baker. Josephine Baker is a great woman. She's a child. She's a love child from Missouri. She went to New York, Harlem, and she went to Paris, and she conquered the world because of her beauty and her uniqueness.
Yeah.
I need to have a room of 10 American women. She chose 10 women, and she had needed that one woman of color. She could have picked Lena Horne. She picked Josephine Baker. She didn't have the money to do the gallery for Josephine Baker. She says, Andre, I need the money for Josephine Baker. I want to show her beauty, her outfits, and her beautiful costumes when she was dancing in Paris, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Miss Baker had passed away then. She, of course, had long been dead. Mm-hmm. And she said, I need you to call Eunice Johnson at Ebony Magazine and ask her for a fund, a donation. And I said to Mrs. Vreeland, and this is a true conversation, I said, Mrs. Vreeland, no. I don't know Mrs. Johnson. You have to write her a letter. Mrs. Johnson will respond to you before she responds to me. I suggest you write the letter to her, and I'm sure she will respond. Mrs. Vreeland wrote the letter, sent the letter. In 5 days, she had a check for $7,000. For $7,000, she did the entire Josephine Baker wing of American Women of Style. Mrs. Johnson, I think, came to the museum. I don't remember her coming to the museum. Maybe she had a pre-tour because she lived in Chicago. But then later one year, Mrs. Johnson came to the Ebony Fashion Fair came to New York in the spring. I picked Deanna Vreeland up at her apartment on Park Avenue. They didn't have limos those days. People went in yellow cabs. I picked her up. We went down to the hotel where the show was being held. And Mrs. Vreeland was treated like a VIP and sat next to Mrs. Johnson. It was one of the greatest moments of my life.
And there's something happened in that moment, which is very similar. I don't know how much of this you've heard about. You talk about how a guest at the show was so amazed at the fact that he got the chance to meet Mrs. Vreeland.
He touched her shoulder
in the flesh, and he literally. And you describe this again in your wonderful wordsmithing, where it was almost as though the shrine had come to him.
Yeah, it was as if he was touching a saint. It was as if he's going to the shrine.
It really was. Now, how much of that, and I don't know if you realize that was very similar to the experience a lot of people in the Nigerian fashion space had when you and Edward Enninful and Naomi Campbell paid a visit to the Arise Fashion Week in Nigeria a couple of years ago. Did you get that sense? A couple of
years ago? Wasn't it last year?
No, the sense of time with the lockdown is just all thrown off. But it was a very similar experience. I mean, I told you I had to pinch myself several times to be sure that this was actually really happening. But then moments like that, I'm sure you understand, are really important to up and coming, not just designers, but even spaces.
That spiritual moment is a spiritual connection.
Yes.
And no matter if I'm from New York, we were in Nigeria, Lagos, the whole spirits were aligned for that trip. Thanks be to God that Naomi Campbell invited me to Lagos. I had never been to Africa. I made great friends. I made you, and I should have shout out to my dear friend Patience. I'm wearing your caftan this morning. Hello, Patience. Send me another one, navy blue or gray. I'm wearing your pinstripe caftans. All praises to Patience.
Hi, Patience.
Patience, and to you. And you gave me beautiful, beautiful bags. You and your party gave me beautiful leather, beautiful couture bags. And I came home with those bags packed with stuff. Now, I want to say this. When I came to Lagos, I didn't know what to expect. But I went on the faith of Naomi Campbell because she had been. And when we got off the plane that night in Lagos, I thought, God, I've come here to die. I see you sent me here to die. The traffic in Lagos is the seventh circle of hell.
It is.
There are no stop signs.
It's even worse now.
From the airport to the island, it's just like, no. I said, God, why did you send me here to die? And I thought, when I got to the hotel, I was fit to be tied. You want to see a vitriolic, venomous, cranky, black bear? when I got out of that damn limousine, and by the way, the car was not a limousine because they messed up limos. And Duca had messed up the cars, and Duca and Naomi was calling him, get that man over here to the hotel. And Dookie was waiting for me as I drove up and put my big size 17 feet out of that run down, but air conditioned, makeshift car from the airport. It was like a Volkswagen or something. And Dookie was there apologetic. It was 10 o'clock at night. And I have drama to a sheet. I can smile at you, but when I give you that look says it all. And Duca knew he had messed up. They had to really mop up their mess to greet me at Lagos. But I loved Lagos, and I loved the most going to the church on Easter Sunday. I was my first Sunday away in Africa, in the homeland. And I had a very spiritual connection to Lagos, meeting you, meeting Patience and her daughter. I felt, and the people I met through the Arise Fashion Week, they did touch me, some of them. I met you because I saw someone wearing one of your shirts. Yeah. And I had to say, who made this? And you weren't even there. And they called you and you ran over.
So I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a prank call. I think you actually took the phone at a point and was like, hey, this is André Leon Talley. Could you come over here? And I was like, this has to be a joke. But I'll just go because I think it's a joke. But I'll just go and the rest, as they say, is history. But then Naomi said something to the press at the Arise Fashion Week, and I would like to get your opinion on that, which is that perhaps it's time for Africa to have a Vogue. She referred to it as the style Bible, so to speak, yes. And that Africa as a continent hasn't really had that kind of opportunity, a platform like a Vogue to showcase when it comes to fashion, the talents that are here. You were the highest ranking Black man we had in fashion, so to speak, until Edward was, recently appointed in British Vogue. But then, do you think that we need to take that step further to have a Vogue type magazine?
Absolutely. And I'd be happy to be the editor-in-chief. And Naomi Campbell will work on the Vogue. Naomi Campbell is a fierce advocacy, African fashion across the map. And she works hard, and she's working hard as an ambassador. And she can make that happen, I think, because she is devoted and dedicated. And Edward Innifel is one of the greatest men. He is perhaps the most important Black man in fashion today. He took my place, and I give him the crown. He's been editor-in-chief of British Vogue for 3 years. He's got awards, and he's making waves. What he is doing, the other Vogues will copy in other countries. Yeah. He not only put Meghan Markle as a guest editor last September, but this September he has a cover called Activism.
Yes.
He also broke the ground when he had an 85-year-old woman on the cover of Vogue in the spring, which had never been done before. And the 85-year-old woman was not a model. It was Dame Judi Dench. Now, you know what Dame Judi Dench does. You've seen her in the movies.
Yes, of course. Yes.
But that shows that beauty is in every form, every shape, and every age category. Edward does not believe in shaming people. The thing about the culture of American Vogue is it was shaming, often without saying they were bullies. I was shamed, and I say now that I was shamed. I was often very hurt. This is why I wrote the book. I wrote the book to let it be known that there was racism at Vogue, without saying, hey, they're racist. Yeah. And I'm not calling Anna Wintour racist. She's not a racist. She is by no means a racist. I owe much to her. She made me the creative director of Vogue, the first Black man. That was a milestone. However, as a British subject born in Britain with a British passport and an American passport, her mother was American, her father was British, Sir Charles Wintour. She is a woman of privilege, and she will not let anything get in the way of her white privilege, her whiteness, her caste system. England is based on society, caste divisions. You've got the royals, you've got the big people with the rich people with the houses. It's always been. You've got the greatest houses, old houses in the country with 200 and 300 rooms that have been through the centuries, passed down through generation to generation. And, it's obsessed with a kind of system that is often unequal. Meghan Markle broke through the mold. She turned the British royal family upside down and then had to leave. She's a rebel. She turned it upside down.
Now, let's come back to the book. Again, I'm trying very hard not to give too much away because I don't know why anyone hasn't read the book at this point. So I won't give too much away for the few people who still haven't read the book. But then you also mentioned that this is the first time that you talk about the subject of your childhood sexual trauma.
Yes.
How did you know the time was finally right to speak about this?
I'm not laughing about the trauma. It was a serial trauma. I decided the time was right to speak about it because I was 70 years old. I had never spoken of my childhood trauma to anyone, no one in my life. And when I got to be 70, I realized that the world would accept the confession that I was a serial victim of childhood violent sexual abuse by grown men in my neighborhood. If I had revealed that to my church or to my grandmother would have died. And I did not want to hurt my grandmother. When I realized that I could go to someone and confess this, I think it would have killed my grandmother before she was taken away. I just kept that shame hidden in me. I blocked it out until one day when I went to meet my editor, Pamela Cannon, with my editor, David Vigilano, and Thomas Flannery, in talking about the book in order to get the book contract. And it just came out. I said, I'll be very honest. I'll talk about my sexual abuse. And in a meeting with 9 white people, all women, and I said the word sexual abuse, no one blinked. And then we never discussed it again. And then I wrote about it. And I said to Pam, do you think I've written enough about it? Do you think I should read more? She said, you've written more than it. You handled it perfectly. No one wants to read about the details of this violent sexual trauma. And I'm not going to present a gothic American Horror Story, but I did admit to it. And it was hateful. And this has obviously made me who I am too. It's not who I am totally. I did not become defeated by my sexual abuse. I did not allow my sexual abuse to overtake my life. I did hide it for 70 years. I think it was a great catharsis that I admitted it in this book. And I could say that this happened to me. And I overcame. I overcame through my faith, through my church, through my belief that I was a strong person. However, it's not something that lives with me. I never had any counseling about it. I would recommend people that get counseling. And I basically, once I went to a psychiatrist once and I said, I've forgiven all the men. I've forgiven them. And this is a Christian way to behave. I've forgiven those men for the sexual abuse. It was a horrible thing. It was ugly. It's terrible. It's terrible to be a victim. But listen, there have been many people who've gone on and become great people. Oprah Winfrey was raped as a child. Yeah. And so I felt that it was time to talk about it.
And, that's the other thing about the book. One, there's a tone of empathy from you that goes all through the book. You have this uncanny understanding of a lot of the other characters that you meet throughout your career, throughout your life. People may have read the criticisms about you not speaking up or standing up to, but it seemed like your approach was one of understanding, even when you were offended. So how were you able to keep this stance all through your life, given some of the horrible things that were thrown at you, and you would take a path of, well, I understand why that would happen. I hate the fact that it would happen, but I understand why it's happening.
I forgave those men. There were many, many men, brothers, early young adult brothers. I was 9. I analyzed the process. And because of my faith, I know that to be a Christian, you have to forgive. And you have to move on. And I managed to get through everything in life based on my faith. When the racism happened, when someone came to Paris, one of the editors of New York came to Paris and said, I had been sleeping with every designer, man and woman. It was like I was a black stud servicing the fashion world, which was not true. I have never slept with any designer. They thought I slept with Karl Lagerfeld. They thought I slept with Hubert de Givenchy. Some people even thought I slept with Diana Vreeland, which was the most offensive comment that ever had told me. But that person I love, because that person was probably, I'm not going to say the person is, but anyway, I just thought, when that person said to me in the office in front of all the white people, he was intimidating me because he thought that I was getting over myself, that I was too influential in the world of fashion. I could see Karl Lagerfeld one day, I could see Yves Saint Laurent the next, and I managed to juggle and balance those relationships. I went to the Madeleine Church in Paris, where Josephine Baker was funeralized. where Marlene Dietrich was funeralized, and where Coco Chanel had her funeral. They were almost like state funerals.
Yeah.
And I just went there one day in the afternoon and lit candles for Mrs. Vreeland and my grandmother. And I prayed and said and meditated in an empty church. I often did that. And I had to seek refuge. I had to seek refuge in the church. And I've always sought refuge in the church, in my Black church. There's no Black church. I didn't have a Black church in Paris, but I went to the Madeleine. And why did I go to the Madeleine? It was near the office. I could walk there in 5 minutes. And because I related to the church because they had funeralized the great Josephine Baker, an immigrant to France, and they gave her almost a state funeral, as well as Coco Chanel and Marlene Dietrich. All of these were heroines to me. And that's why I decided to resign and submit my resignation and have the resignation letter notarized by the American consulate adjacent to the American embassy, because I was not going to have it said that they had fired me. I had proof. I don't know where the letter is, somewhere buried in my archives. Because, they could have said, he got fired because he was stealing the petty cash. Or he got fired because he was stealing samples, wardrobe samples, and selling them. That's what happens to Black men.
You were accused of that in the book. You were accused of doing just that.
And that Givenchy was a great moral man. He would never have done such a thing. And I would have never stolen sketches that had been given to me. But people in Saint Laurent were so jealous of me because I made friends with Hubert de Givenchy and Karl Lagerfeld at the same time. And these were enemy camps. They couldn't understand how they wanted me to just be in the Saint Laurent camp and just ignore the talents of Saint Laurent and all the Claude Montana and Terry Mugler, anyone. So I've always been able to sustain myself and endure the vicissitudes because I know in the end that God will take care. His yoke is easy and his burden is light. Matthew chapter 11, verse 30.
Duly noted. Coming back to the book, you also have this you have this exciting relationship with Yves Saint Laurent, Karl Lagerfeld, Oscar de la Renta, and they throw lavish parties. And incidentally, they also happen to be homosexual men who have partners who are quite public about this. This seems like a setting in New York or France in the 2000s. Only this is happening in the 1970s. How was this able, or how were these men, how was fashion able to create what seemed to be a safe space for these kinds of relationships to seemingly publicly thrive at a time where, in the general society, it was hugely frowned upon?
Well, I would say in the 70s, New York was a very liberating place. People had more freedom in the 70s with fashion. In the 70s, there were two great designers, Yves Saint Laurent in Paris and Halston in New York City. Halston, unfortunately, succumbed to AIDS and his addiction to drugs, particularly cocaine. But the world of fashion created a bubble where these people could live and express their talents in a beautiful way. And they lived well. They had beautiful homes. Mr. Halston collected great art. Mr. Saint Laurent lived in a fabulous apartment in the Rue de Babylone with the most extraordinary antiques. I mean, when he died, they sold the furnishings in his house. I think it made $40 or $50 million. You can find out. You can fact check that. Yeah. But they had a chair. The chair went for like, I don't know. It was some great Art Deco chair. It went for, oh my God. It went like, I don't know what the person paid for the one. An old leather chair. But he had beautiful Raphaelite pre-Burns Jones paintings. He had beautiful statues and everything. This was in the 70s when the people were liberated in New York, particularly. Before AIDS, there was a great kind of liberation in the world of fashion. And people were allowed to live their dreams. They were allowed to achieve their dreams. No one talked about Saint Laurent being gay, or people knew he was gay. And everyone knew there was gayness. But there's always been gayness in fashion, in sections of society. And this happened to be a great time when, in the 70s particularly, when fashion was fabulous. Fashion was extraordinary. Egon von Furstenberg and Princess Diane von Furstenberg, they were extraordinary. They were the it couple of New York. They gave great parties. They lived in a 35-room apartment on Park Avenue. It was just a moment when the affluence of the high fashion designers were a band that helped people to aspire to be themselves. And when I got to New York, I became a part of that group based on Andy Warhol. And Andy Warhol was a great boss. Andy Warhol just was a great man. He was a fabulous man. And I think he was a great man. He was a brilliant man. He was smart, but he pretended to be sort of naive and dumb, but he was very smart. He went to church every day of his life, and he went to the Catholic Church before he went to work. And he went to church. You know what he did? He thanked God for his money.
Oh, wow. Okay. Now, there's someone missing in this book, Andre, and I have to ask you about that. Why is Tyra not in this book?
Tyra is not in the book because Tyra took me into the America's Next Top Model, and that was another medium outside of my publishing world. That was a different medium. That was the world of television, and that's why I had to edit something out, and I did not include Tyra. As in the past, I had not talked that much about Mrs. Johnson. I did include Mrs. Johnson in this book, did I not?
Yes, you did. Okay. So that puts that speculation that there is more to the story that led to that not coming up.
What, Tyra?
Yes.
Oh, simply, Tyra is a fabulous human being. I adored being America's Next Top Model. I adored her. She came to me. You know, she came to me the first year before her first season, she wanted me to be a judge. And I said, no, I can't be a judge because I'm in Vogue. But then she came to me at a time when I could be, because I was expanding my freelance talents, and Tyra paid me a fortune. I was able to have my house painted. It cost $90,000 to paint my house outside. It took the men 2 men a year. They painted it correctly. And from that $90,000, I was paid by Tyra, and I got that check to pay for the painting of my house. I did not get that money from Vogue. It was also at a time when Vogue had clamped down on my salary after 2009 and the recession that was about to happen. They took chunks out of everybody's salary. They never put it back. So I went out and saw money elsewhere through a black woman of color, and Tyra Blanks is a successful, great black woman.
Okay.
She's now judge.
So there you go, audience.
The hostess of Let's Dancing with the Stars. You know, she just got the gig Dancing with the Stars.
Okay. Oh, wow. Congratulations to Miss Tyra then. So now the next question, which is the other question, which you know I have to ask is, you've only had a crush on 2 people. So tell us about that.
I'm not, let the people read the book to find out about the crushes.
Well, that's true. That's a good point. So read it to find out. And then, so are we saying that since the publication of the book, there's been no other crushes? Just an update on that.
I have many crushes. I have crushes, many crushes every day.
Anyone that you would want to share with us?
I have a crush on Lady Black, Barbara Emile Black, who's a dear friend who just published her own memoirs. It's about to come out. It's called Friends and Enemies. It's a 680-page memoir. And she's a close friend. She's married to Lord Conrad Black. They live in Canada. I have a huge crush on her. I have many, many crushes. I have a crush on any movie star I see coming across the screen at night. I have a crush on James Caan in Rollerball, 1975. And then that film went off, and I said, "Oh, you know." Will Smith.
Will Smith. Okay.
Crush. Would love to make crush. Who else? Let me think. Recently, crush. Big crush. I have a crush on Joshua Johnson.
Okay.
The anchor who has one of the news anchors on MSNBC. So they're crushes, and they're crushes every day. Okay.
And then any more serious than crushes?
None.
Still no update on that.
None.
All right.
It's sad that I could not meet Riccardo Ojosa, who's in the book, who's an Italian artist. I have a crush on Princess Gloria von Turner Taxis, which is totally insane and wild, because it will never happen, but she's a dear friend of mine. I adore her, and we're very close. I have crushes on everybody. My crushes are because I love them, you know?
Yeah.
I'm happy to say that I love good people. I don't have crushes on criminals. I don't have crushes on terrorists. I don't have crushes on gangsters or thugs. You think I have a crush on the man in the White House? No.
And how has that affected your friendship with his wife?
Oh, we have not communicated in over 2 years by email. That friendship has gone down the rabbit hole. We emailed and then we stopped emailing, and I wouldn't trust an email to go to her now because I don't know. She didn't answer the emails, but she was very respectful of me. I think she was emailing when the book came out and she wanted the book, but I think she got the book. I'm not sure, but that's over.
Okay, next, you talk about ageism in fashion. and you mentioned it earlier in the discussion, and the whole idea of an absence of mentorship. You know, your relationship with Dan is an example of how these kinds of relationships really do nurture great talent and move things on. But it seems like we're losing touch on that. Why do you think that's the situation in fashion these days?
People don't have time to sit down and talk. People don't listen to each other. People are not, they don't look you in the eye directly. This is why I have a crush on Lady Black. She looks at you in your eye and talks to you. I had so many beautiful friends in my life that made me feel like I was the only person in the room when they spoke to me. All of my friends, Deanna Reeland, Lee Radziwill, all of my white female friends would look at me as if I was the only person that mattered at that moment when we were engaged in a dialogue or conversation. People don't take time to talk. People are so busy answering their emails. They're walking down the streets looking at their smartphones. They're rude. People are rude and lacking civility. And I blame a lot of that on the person at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. When I was in college, I looked up to my teachers in high school. Wanda Garrett, who is still alive, my favorite high school teacher. Wow. She's still alive, and I see her when I go home to Durham. And I just looked up to her. She was my heroine in everything. All of my college professors, I looked up to them. I respected them. And I recently gave a Zoom talk on my book for a book club at my church. And one of the great ladies of the church, in a prayer, after the talk was over, she said the most powerful words. She said, and this man who has listened and learned, because I said one of the advice I would give to young people is you listen and you learn. I listened to everything Deanna Reeland said to me, and I learned. That's what steered me on to Mr. John Fairchild. Because when I talked about clothes, I had learned how to talk about clothes from Deanna Reeland. I didn't know how to talk about clothes before Deanna Reeland. But I knew I loved clothes. But Mrs. Reeland taught me the rare skill of describing a garment from inside out. The inner structure was as important as the exterior.
Yeah.
Each dress has a narrative, if it's an important dress. Who wore it? Who designed it? What was the inspiration behind the design? So I think that mentors come when you listen to a person. I have mentored so many people. I've mentored a designer called Laquan Smith. He is a completely active, very successful Black designer who is self-made. I gave him $2,000 after his first show. And I said, take this $2,000, go to Paris, because you've never been to Paris. I didn't say, take the $2,000 and go to Paris and try to go meet Yves Saint Laurent, Karl Lagerfeld. I said, you take it and you go to Paris and you sit in a restaurant. You order a croissant. You order hot chocolate. You just look at the way the light hits the stone biscuits building, the biscuit colored stone of those great Louvre buildings built back in the 15th to 16th centuries, the 17th century, the Louvre, the Tuileries. I said, you just go to Paris and walk down the avenue and you just look at the way the dew hits those trees, those alleys of trees after a rain, what the street looks like, what the color green looks like in Paris as opposed to New York. I mentioned Laquan Smith. On his third show, I had Serena Williams walk in the show. Serena Williams was in New York for the U.S. Opens, and I went to her hotel room. And I said, Serena, come with me. You're going to be at a fashion show, darling. A Black man. Oh, okay. Serena didn't have a fitting. We ran to the hotel. She put on the dress. It's like a bubble thing, like a fish bowl. And she squeezed into that thing. You know, she's got the most greatest body in the world. She's got the body of a Black goddess. And she walked in the runway, and Common, she was then dating Common, and Common, she'd broken up with Common, and he was in the room. And look, it was a small show. I invited Miss Winter to the show, but she couldn't make it.
Okay, so I'm trying very hard not to stare at your face and keep it moving, but okay, she couldn't make it. We'll leave it at that. Andre, give me your thoughts, your feelings about.
That's my activism. That was activism, baby.
Well, that's the thing.
He's walking in the finale of a Laquan Smith show. That's called my version of Black activism. Bringing the world of the greatest tennis player ever in our times to the world of fashion for the young, emerging Laquan Smith. And that was my form of activism, baby. And I put it in my column.
And the world heard you. And the world heard you. Now let's talk about Africa, Andre. You finally came down to Africa a few last year.
Correct that I came to North Africa before I got to Africa. I've been in Marrakesh.
Yeah.
But Africa, I came down to Lagos, yes.
Yes, came down to Lagos. And now let's talk about the fashion industry in Africa. What's your take? Because it seems as though the impression the West has of the African fashion industry is, simply put, that it's irrelevant. It's too small to matter. Once in a while we could cherry pick a few talents and bring them over to the West for them to be relevant. But what's your take on the potential of the fashion industry in Africa? And taking that a step further, how do you think we could build it?
Seeing the spectrum of African fashion is great. Has great potential. I was very impressed. I found there were very sophisticated people in Lagos Fashion Week. I think Nduki does a great job. I saw many, many wonderful, sophisticated, and very talented designers. And I think that Africa has the great potential across the whole continent to have a burgeoning and thriving and successful industry about African fashion. And I must say the potential is how you all can do it is just keep getting up and doing what you do. And somehow there will be a global a concerted effort. And it is young. I mean, I was so impressed with the designs that came in front of my face, with the people, the business people, especially the women, the smartness of the women, the panels that Naomi had, those discussions about women, and they were educated and smart. And most of the African fashions were also probably expressing many, many elements of the African history, the ancestral, traditional African textures, but updated to modernity. And I find Africa was exciting. And I wanted to come back, but the pandemic came. I was coming back this year, but the pandemic came and we shut down. So it's probably in a little hiatus, hibernating for the season. And it's going to come out of the pandemic, and Naomi's going to bring me back to Arise.
So we look forward to having you once this pandemic is over. Back to the book. What was the hardest part of this book for you to write?
Oh, it was not hard at all. I loved writing the book. The hardest part was editing, cutting it down. I'd written so many pages on Lee Radswell, whom I dedicated the book to, a great friend, you know, Jackie Kennedy's sister. I must have written 100 pages, and I had to get that down. The hardest part was what I left out. And even as I speak to you today, I've come across things in my memory, because I don't have a diary, that I should have put in the book. And I kept saying,
like what? Okay, tell us some of them. Come on.
Well, wait a minute. Don't bully me now. Don't bully, because you know I'll turn on you. And I'm just teasing. One of the things that I've left out in the conversation is that when I went to Martha Stewart, you know Martha Stewart, she's a great queen style at home. So she's a very wonderful, successful woman. And I consider her a pal, and I respect her, and she's done great things. And so I was invited to her house once for lunch. We had a great compound up in upstate New York. Great estate of over 100 acres, beautiful horses, beautiful decor, everything. And so I was the only Black person at the lunch. It was a big luncheon. And it was beautifully laid out, beautiful dishes and everything, and beautiful food. And so there were many different varieties of dishes. And so out comes a plate of pig feet. And maybe they were Asian. I think they were Asian pig feet, because I think in Asia they consider pig feet a delicacy. Well, you know, in the Black culture, pig feet is the poor people's food. That's what they ate down on the plantation when they had nothing else to eat. They eat the pig, they eat the pigs this, the pig that, and the chitlins. And so it was beautifully arranged, the pig feet. And the pig feet, she was trying to be polite by including the pig feet. But I took it as, I said, pig feet? And I thought, well, how do I respond to this? And I got up on my high horse and said, pig feet, Martha? I've never eaten pig feet, and I'm not going to start today. Now, you know I knew about pig feet. I knew about pig feet. My grandmother may have cooked a pig feet or two in her life, but she never forced me to eat one. I never had a pig feet in my mouth. And never had chitlins. My grandmother used to cook chitlins once a year, and I ain't never had a chitlin in my life, pig's intestines. but it's considered a Black gourmet dish. And I thought, but she didn't realize that was kind of offensive. And I was telling my friend that one day, Janice Mays, my very dear friend, I'm in school with at Brown, and she just broke out laughing. She said, "You should have put that in the book."
Yeah, you definitely should have. Okay. Anything else? Anyone else that pops out to you?
No, I think that's the only thing I think about. That's the most current thing. Things come to me and I say, "Oh, I forgot about that. I should have put it in the book." But there might be silly things. I can't really think of another one. The pig feet is the most current. The pig feet. But then I did put it in an airmail. I contributed to the airmail column, and I did include it in the airmail column.
Now, have you gotten any kind of backlash from anyone who was included in the book?
Never. None.
So far, nothing.
Nothing. Anna Winter doesn't talk to me anymore. I think she's erased me from her contact, deleted me, the email and phone. I never heard from her since February, since I gave her the galley. She was the first one to have the galley. And we had a conversation about the book, and she asked me to remove things about her children, which I did. You don't read anything about her children in the book.
Yeah.
And I've never heard from her since, and I don't imagine I will ever hear from her again. But people they love the book. People love, all my friends who are in the book love the book. I've never gotten one negative thing about the book.
No, that's interesting. Now there is this ugly incident, which you've addressed this in different fora, but then I want to ask you a different question about it, where you were in Paris and a friend of yours told you that there's this ugly rumor going around that someone's calling you Queen Kong. And it literally really hurt you. But then, did you ever address this with the person who did that?
Oh, I would give her the credit. I would give her the time. I never. That person was never. I would never even acknowledge that. Oh, it was a woman.
Yes, it was a woman, and so you never ever, like, that was it. You just pushed the delete button and you were done.
I buried it inside of me, and kept it inside of me until I revealed it in the documentary, The Gospel According to Andre.
Yeah.
And as I said, it was hurtful. I knew about it, but it made me stronger to know about that. Paloma Picasso, my friend, it made me stronger. It made me a better person. I didn't succumb to my serial sexual traumas. It made me a stronger person to know that there was out there racism. They were calling me Queen Kong, and that is a very ugly racist thing to say. And this person, I think, is still alive, living in Paris, retired. And this was a bitter person. She was bitter. And they were envious of me, and the whole cabal, the whole Saint Laurent family, except for Betty Catrou, who is still my dear friend, the greatest muse of Yves Saint Laurent. The whole Yves Saint Laurent executive cabal was campaigning against me. Yeah. Whereas the muses, Yves Saint, Betty Catrou and Lulu de la Falaise, adored me. Lulu de la Falaise is dead. Betty Catrou is still there, and she you see, she's prominent in my book. She's a friend. She's a friend. So I get along with the best people. Betty Catrou. I get along with the Vicomtesse de Ribes. She is on the best dressed list. Well, I was sitting on my porch one day this summer, and this Federal Express package came, and I opened it, and I thought, "Oh my God, what legal letter is this? This is a letter from my Lord. Lord, what have I done now?" It was a letter from Jacqueline de Ribes, highest level of style ever. Praising my book and thanking me for including her in the book, thanking me for my illustrious career. I had to live framed.
That's lovely. Now, there's something beautiful about your book, and we talked about it earlier, which is we understand now with we're having a lot more conversations. We're hearing a lot more conversations about racism in the United States of America and across the world. Outside of the overt racism, we also understand now a lot more of the institutionalized racism, how systems are built to propagate racism, even without the knowledge of those who are part of the system. And oftentimes it comes off as things such as white privilege. So white people are not even aware that they are part of a system that is, racist, that is harmful to people of other races, people who are non-white. And so there's this deep sense of love or appreciation and empathy when you have these white friends that seem to recognize this and reach out to you. How did you find such people, particularly way back when racism was a lot more overt than it was? How were you able to find friends who were able to be a bit more aware of these types of things?
I moved in circles that were very sophisticated and very advanced. So all of my friends who were white were always people who were educated, who had achieved greatness, and who were aware that we are all one family, that we are born with different colors, but we are all equal. They had been educated, they've been brought up properly, and they realized I would never, ever, ever thought Betty Catrue, not a racist bone in her body, unconditional love. Deanna Vreeland, unconditional love. Deanna Vreeland embraced Black people. She loved Black models. She loved Black people. She loved Josephine Baker. Read her memoir about Josephine Baker with the cheetah in a V&A dress. And Andy Warhol, I always was lucky because people saw in me something that was authentic. It was not artificial. I was very handsome when I was young. I was very, very striking. And I think I still am today. People always saw past the veneer, the interior landscape of the person that I am. And they saw through my interactions with them, Black and white, that I was a person that was unique, that I had empathy, and that I was sincere. And I managed to be lucky to have great, great friends, particularly women friends. Now, the only Black friend that ever did anything for me was will.i.am. will.i.am came late in my life. And I owe to will.i.am a great deal because will.i.am came to me when I was sort of down and out. But will.i.am hired me to be a creative consultant for him. And he was a great man. I didn't have that many great Black male friends. I didn't have that many great white male friends. But somehow women always have gravitated to me. I think I'm writing a book. My next book will be The Women in Me. And I will cite maybe the 12 most significant women in my life, including Deanna Vreeland, Anna Wintour. Amongst them would be Betty Catrue, Dionne von Furstenberg, my dear friend, Dr. Janice A. Mays, professor at Syracuse University, who was about to retire next year. We went Brown together. So I will include all these friends. Now, the only great white friend that I ever had was Karl Lagerfeld.
Yeah.
That's a meal. Karl Lagerfeld saw in me from the first day. I don't know what he saw, but he saw something he could connect to. We remained friends for over 3 decades. He was a great friend.
What happened?
My knowledge and the way I spoke and what I spoke about. I didn't say superficial things. When I opened my mouth, I must have imparted a sense of knowledge. I don't know. It wasn't my physicality, it was my knowledge.
But do you think that there was also the aspect of your deep sense of empathy and understanding of how people function? Because there were a lot of people you describe in the book he deleted from his life, essentially. And he wasn't someone who really liked people close to him. So how were you able to avoid the guillotine for so long?
For so long, I avoided the guillotine because for so long I understood where Karl was coming from because we were almost like brothers, surrogate brothers separated at birth. I realized that Karl had gone through perhaps childhood trauma that he never talked about. But I also realized he made his own world. He escaped through books, and I escaped through books. When we first met, I first met that first day in May 1975 at the Plaza Hotel with Andy Warhol and Fred Hughes, Jerry Hall, Antonio Lopez, Juan Ramos. I had done my homework. I had read everything I could possibly read then on Karl Lagerfeld. So when I interviewed Karl Lagerfeld, I interviewed him about things that he loved, the 18th century. I didn't interview him about, well, did you have a hot dog on Fifth Avenue? Where did you go this afternoon? Did you go down to Rizzoli to buy a book? I talked to him about the 18th century, and I'd done all my homework and research, and I think that impressed him. And he realized that he must have respected that sense of preparedness. And then that first day, he was throwing me lavish gifts, cast offs from his wardrobe, things that he just threw me, silk scarves, silk shirts. And that's how we became friends. And we started becoming friends. We corresponded, letter writing. We loved to write. We wrote letters and he would mail them. There was no fax when we met in 75. We had to wait for letters to come. So he loved writing letters. So I have letters and letters and letters stuck in my attic at home in North Carolina. So I think that all my friends, the late Charles Schlumberger, John Galliano, Hubert de Givenchy, all these people saw in me something that came from my ancestral strength.
As we come to the close of this conversation, I have two more questions I want to ask you, and they come from the start of the book. First of all, the book is, you say, for Reverend Dr. Calvin O. Butts III,
yeah,
and in loving memory of Lee Bouvier Radswell. So tell us why.
Calvin O. Butts III.
People? Yeah.
First of all, Calvin O. Butts III is my minister and has been since 1989 at the Abyssinian Baptist Church, one of the oldest churches in the state of New York. The state, not the city. The state, one of the first African-American missionary Baptist churches. It is a church of world renown. I've been a member there. I've been very supportive. And Dr. Butts has been a friend. He's been a friend in interventions of my weight. I can call on him for prayer on the phone, and he is a friend. I consider him a friend, but I also respect him as a great orator. Lee Radziwill was a friend of mine who died last year, and I decided to dedicate the book to her after her death. She didn't know that before she died. She died last year in February, so did Karl Lagerfeld. But Lee Radziwill was an unconditional friend. She showed me unconditional love, and she was American royalty. She was a sister of Jackie Kennedy, and she was great. She just made you feel like you were the only person whenever she talked to you. She sent me to a psychiatrist about my weight. Excuse me. She'd bring me gifts on her trips. Wonderful little souvenirs from Thailand. When she died, a package arrived on my porch one day, a big white box. And in the box was a leopard cushion and a framed photograph of her. Let me see if I can get it. You'll see in the book, there's a picture of me and Lee Radziwill. Yeah. Me in a white Prada crocodile jacket, Lee in a white Dior couture suit. Lee was just the most seductive friend you could ever have. She was just the most wonderful, and she was original, and she thought out of the box. There was no racist bone in her body. When Barack Obama started to run for president, Lee and I met up at the headquarters in New York and gave out checks for $2,800. That's the limited amount we contributed. And we were proud to get out of the taxi and go up to that office and give them out checks. We went to the office. We didn't send them. We ran to the office in a taxi to give each our own $2,800 checks. So I've gone through many things with Lee. And Lee was a dear friend. I think of Lee every day. I think of all my mentors. I think of Deanna Vreeland every day. I think of my grandmother every day. I lean on these saints. I lean on these departed angels. These are the better angels that God gave to the earth. I think of my grandmother every day, my Mrs. Vreeland. I sometimes think of Andy Warhol, and I certainly think of Lee Radziwill. And I think of Karl Lagerfeld. I mean, Karl Lagerfeld was the greatest friend I could ever have.
Yeah. And I think it's important for you guys in the audience, if you want to know more about, because we often hear about Lee's sister, Jacqueline Kennedy, but it turns out that Lee's actually the more fashionable of both.
Yes.
So I think that's exciting to learn more about from the book.
Let me interrupt. Mrs. Vreeland told me before she passed away several times that it was Lee who taught Jackie everything about style. Lee had the best style. Lee first worked under Deanna Vreeland in Harper's Bazaar. And she said that it's Lee who knew everything about style, about decorating, about entertaining, and clothes. It was Lee who introduced Jackie to all those great designers like Givenchy, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Like, Lee would discover. Lee would, no, I left that out. Lee would discover things like she'd run around in a New York boutique and she said, she'd find these fabulous cashmere sweaters. And she might call her sister up and say, this is an anecdote that's from someone else, it's not from me. So I can't put this in the book. It's from Bob Colichello of Interview Magazine, who was my boss. And Lee would call up her sister and say, I just found the most extraordinary cashmere sweaters at the Boo 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 Boutique. Boo Boo Boo, whatever, that's the name. I'm making up the name. And then Jackie would run down to the boutique and buy all the cashmere sweaters so no one else could have them.
Oh, wow. Okay, now, and for the last question as we wrap up, the next page in the book says, how I got over. My soul looks back and wonders how I got over. And it's from Clara Ward. Mr. André Leon Talley, how did you get over? It's been a long ride, a 70-something-year-old ride. A man from the rural South who's navigated his way straight through every thinkable barrier as if they never really exist. How did you get over?
Thank you, Joseph, for that final question. That's a very fabulous way to end this great conversation. I've enjoyed it immensely. I hope you all have enjoyed it in your festival, in your AKF. What is it? AKF?
AKE. AK.
AK.
Yes.
The word said, the Clara word says it all. How I got over, my soul looks back and wonder. Well, you know, I got over because I look back to my faith. I got over based on my faith. That song is so important to me, How I Got Over. I love it when Aretha Franklin sings it. I love it when Clara Ward sings it. I tell you, we are a musical culture. Black is a culture of musicality in our dance, in our bodies, in our song. Another great song that I often lean to is Precious Lord, written by the late, great Thomas Dorsey, who started as a jazz musician, jazz person, and he moved into gospel singing. Thomas Dorsey was the greatest spiritual songwriter ever who lived. And Thomas Dorsey wrote Precious Lord because his wife had died giving childbirth, I think. You might have to look the history up. But you know, I was just given Precious Lord. I woke up one morning, I had Precious Lord on my smartphone. And you know who was singing Precious Lord a cappella?
Who?
James Baldwin. James Baldwin. And this is an old song. This is some old tape found. And this was moved me so I welled up with tears. So I lean often in silence in my house. I'm walking around worrying about this and worrying about that, worrying about my weight, worrying about what I'm going to eat, worrying about this 9 o'clock appointment. Well, it's 5 o'clock, wherever you are. And I just started singing these songs in my head. Precious Lord, How I Got Over. My soul looks back and wonder. And when they sing it in church, I just get so full of the spirit. And these are the things that have carried my ancestors over. My great-great-grandmother, China, who could skin a squirrel and put it in a stew pot and kill a chicken in the backyard with an axe. They got over from their strength, from song, from Bible reading, missionary helper reading. That's how my ancestors got over. They were not people of wealth. My grandmother had to leave elementary school to take care of her siblings. Yet for 50 years, she was a domestic maid. But she was the strongest woman and the most elegant woman that I've ever met. And I give her the praise. And that's how I got over, Joseph.
Thank you so much, Andre, for taking the time to talk to us. The book, The Chiffon Trenches, a fantastic read. And Andre, thank you so much.
If you ever need a new place to go, you can join me in a world of words. Then it seems like I'm nowhere to be found. If you look, you'll find me in a book. Let's take a ride to the past in the back of a phoenix. Let's float around the moon. You'll never be alone. Now you know where to look. Find me, find you, find the word in a book. You'll never be alone. Now you know where to look. Find me, find you, find the word in a book.
We don't just think of ourselves as a bank. We think of ourselves as corporate citizens with responsibility for growing the economy. Reading and education is a key part of it. But equally important is having access to reading materials at home. A lot of the intervention we've done throughout this COVID is to ensure that people can safely navigate the uncertainties of the COVID crisis and come out of it ready for, to live again.
Let's take a ride to the past in the back of a phoenix. Let's float around the moon.
The dreams that we have are limited by what we have directly interacted with. What reading does is it makes it possible for you to begin to live in worlds that don't yet exist. One read creates a discipline of reading. One read puts me on a timeline. It gives me an important book and I have an opportunity to read it and to collaborate. It's almost like having someone who does your book selection for you. If you have editors and people who are really good at this saying to you, this is the book for the month, I value that. I want to be able to read in a community. I want reading to be a collaborative thing. I want reading to be a communing, and One Read allows me to do that. I will use One Read any day, anytime.